Well, hello. Wasn't this a gorgeous New England spring afternoon? So glad that we're here together. Oh, thank you all, and thank you to the members of this church, this Christian Science Church here in Hartford, for arranging for this talk and bringing us together on this beautiful afternoon. Before I get started, I just have to tell you a quick little story of what happened. I was speaking, I travel all around the country and some international travel, and I was in Hartford, yes, I'm in Hartford now. I was in Canada, and I checked into my hotel, and it was a boutique hotel, like a one-of-a-kind. And I checked into my room, went in, and then I went into the bathroom and taped to the mirror, okay, picture this, so there's this little piece of paper, and this is what it said. This is your reminder that you're awesome. Isn't that neat? So what I want to say to all of you this afternoon, let this be your reminder that you are awesome. Can you do that? Yes, yes, yes. And we want to welcome, we have friends, this is being live streamed, so we have friends watching online. We want to welcome them too to our time together. We're glad you're here with us to think about our subject, a spiritual revolution, the quest to experience God. Now, something very interesting just was published it was about maybe say a month ago, and perhaps you're familiar with the Pew Research Institute. They do a lot of surveys and studies, very well-regarded institution, and they published recently the findings of a survey. And what they found was that the massive leaving of churches has stopped, and that the secularization, this is now speaking of the US, has paused. And I think everyone that's interested in these things really took note of that, because clearly the spiritual and religious landscape has been changing, and it has been for some time. But it's interesting. The article that I read they were attributing it to two factors. First, the pandemic, and the way that undoubtedly has changed many of our lives in many different ways. And also, and this was a US-based survey. They said Americans' stubborn spirituality. Stubborn spirituality. A spiritual revolution, the quest to experience God. I just love that idea. And of course, it's not just American stubborn spirituality, but that sense that spiritual yearning, that spiritual desire for understanding, for relationship, for connection, it is just not going away, and has not. Has anyone heard of the God-shaped hole? H-O-L-E? Does that sound familiar to anyone? No, I see heads going. Well, I had the same response when I was speaking at a prison some time ago, and I had a group it was a men's prison. There was about 25 of the men sitting in a U around me. I asked them that question, and they said, no, never heard of it. And I just spontaneously said, does anybody know what it is or what it might be? And one of the men, quick as lightning, raised his hand. He said, that place in all of us that only God can fill. Isn't that lovely? That place in all of us that only God can fill. Well, it's interesting because in addition to that survey that was published about Americans' stubborn spirituality, there's more research that's been done. And there is a psychologist, Dr. Lisa Miller. She lives in Westport, but she's a part of Teachers College at Columbia University. And recently in an interview, this is what she said, that spirituality is innate. It's an inborn human capacity. And then she went on to say that we now have science, peer-reviewed science, done within the medical field, of course, for 20 years, that say we are innately spiritual beings. And she said, when we strengthen our spiritual core, we are healthier, we are more resilient. Now, for some of us who have been on a spiritual path for some time, I'm not sure we need scientific studies to tell us that we are innately spiritual. Maybe it's something that you feel deep in your heart or that you know. But it's, I think, really interesting and wonderful to recognize that this is now this quest, this yearning for spiritual understanding. It's being recognized, acknowledged in greater and greater ways. And so we're going to talk about this idea of a spiritual revolution first. What is this? Well, if you think about a revolution, it's usually inspired by a deep need for something different, something new, maybe to break free of what feels like some kind of oppression, right? To experience a greater sense of freedom. And then if you think about a quest, what a quest is, well, what is a quest? A quest is a journey, isn't it? It's a mission. It's a seeking after something. And it often involves having an expectation of finding what you're looking for, overcoming hardships, being persistent. Sometimes it requires a great deal of persistence. So this spiritual revolution, as I understand it, is this seeking after a greater sense of, and a fresh sense of God, of deity, that there is a breaking away from, a breaking free of what some have called the reward-punishment paradigm in understanding God. God as a deity that you behave and you do well and you're rewarded, but you start to mess up or you do something wrong and whoop, you're going to be punished. And so that idea of that paradigm of a reward-punishment God, folks are wanting to break free, are breaking free from that and seeking after something different, something fresh, something practical, and something beyond this spiritual revolution, beyond just what the visible universe offers us, and a reaching for the infinite unseen. And I think as part of that, and I hear about this from folks all the time, both in my healing practice. You heard in the introduction, I'm a professional Christian Science practitioner. In my healing practice, I hear it from my students. I'm a teacher. I hear it from the public, people that I meet, that enough about God. I want a direct experience of the divine. I want to participate in it. I want to know it's real, it's practical, it's provable. Don't tell me anything more. And you know, when you have an experience of something, I mean, you're a participant in it, it leads to understanding. And it's that understanding and realization that I think really changes things for us. And I do believe, I just met an Uber driver recently. I have an opportunity to talk to a lot of Uber drivers in my travels. And this young man was, I can't tell you, he was so earnest. He started pummeling me with questions when he heard that this was a talk that I was going to give. And he said, I'm totally open-minded. I just want to understand. I want to understand more. And I think that's that seeking, yearning heart that wants something. So is this something new? Is it just happening in the last 20 years or earlier than that? Well, no. If you go to the Bible and in the Hebrew scriptures, or you Christians, we call it the Old Testament, referred to as the Old Testament, there's a psalm. There's many psalms, but in Psalms, this is one verse that just touches my heart. It says, really speaks, I think, to that irrepressible spiritual hunger in human hearts. O God, you are my God. Early will I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh longs for you in a dry and thirsty land where no water is, to see your power and your glory. That's written Psalms many, many, many years ago. So this is not something new. In fact, again, in the Old Testament, in Jeremiah, there's a beautiful passage, and it's God speaking, saying, I will give you a heart to know me, that I am the Lord. And see, that's what beats in all of us, is that desire to know our Creator, that desire to know our Maker. And now there's many different spiritual paths that people are on today. I hear about lots of different practices, lots of different avenues. We are going to take a look at this yearning through the lens of Christian Science, the spiritual teachings that are the foundation of this talk. They are the foundation of this church. And so we'll look at it that way through the lens of Christian Science. And we're not talking about blind faith. We're not talking about Scientology or positive thinking, mind over matter. We are talking about spiritual teachings that help us to understand deity and to understand, get a fresh lens, looking at a fresh lens for understanding ourselves and our world, and creation. The founder of the global spiritual movement, Christian Science, Mary Baker Eddy, she is a woman that's life and accomplishments were huge. And while she's not here with us physically today, her influence and example continues today. She has touched and transformed thousands of lives for generations and is continuing to do so through her life example and through her writings, which were extensive and are extensive. But before I go any further, I want to suggest something to you: the quest to experience God. You don't have to be in any kind of a formal setting or say certain words in order to experience God. It is absolutely divinely natural. And so I want to suggest to all of you that you let this be an experience of God. We know you all are awesome. We have already established that, right? From the beginning. But let this be. Now, there's a passage in the New Testament, in Matthew, that I want to read to you, and then a Sunday school student, how he understood this passage. And maybe this is one that is familiar to some of you. This is again Jesus speaking, saying, "Come to me, all you that are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." Well, this little boy in Sunday school, this is what he heard: "Come to me, all you that are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will do the rest." Isn't that great? I will do the rest. A little child shall lead them. Because Christian Science, these teachings are based in the Bible, primarily the life and work and healing practice of Christ Jesus. And when he said, "Come to me, all you," right? Coming to that Christly sense of life. "And I will do the rest," our little friend said, right? Well, let me tell you about someone that did just that. and the impact that it had for him. And so I want you all to just recognize, let this be an experience. And so if there's something you've come with, like this example I'm going to share with you, let it be uplifted. This gentleman came to one of the talks, and he said, he came, it was just a couple of months after his wife had passed on. And he said that since that time, he said he's been almost fixated on saying and thinking that his world had collapsed after his wife passed, and that he had to go through some kind of a rebuilding process for that to happen. And he had to search for purpose for his life. Well, he said, as he was reflecting on the message that he heard, he said he realized, I don't need to rebuild something that God has already created. Though he said some renovations here or there might not be so bad. He said, but I don't have to search for what is already within and abundantly around me. That it was more a matter of recognizing and acknowledging rather than seeking after something that he had lost. He said, I may have lost a person that I love, but I did not in any way lose love, capital L, or the blessing that love provides. And we see up there, God is love. That's what the Bible tells us. And he said he went on that as he continued to drive, he said, I felt a sense of peace that I had not experienced in a very, very long time. Isn't that lovely? An experience of God. And so what Christian Science helps us to see is that love that is God, is a present, reliable power in our lives that we can never be separated from, we can never lose touch with, never be cut off from. And that love is infinite, limitless, all-inclusive, unconditional. Mary Baker Eddy, the founder of these teachings, of Christian Science, her life example is a bold and a gentle example of the motherhood and spiritual womanhood of God. Now, I was raised and many people also, I know, were raised with this understanding of God as Father, which is wonderful. Also, Christian Science helps us to understand God as Mother, as a Father, Mother God, bringing forth that completeness of deity. And Mary Baker Eddy's life example is there for all of humanity to see. Now, others, of course, have given that same example, that expression of that love, that mother love. But it's interesting because Desmond Tutu, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, said, we've hardly spoken of the motherhood of God and consequently are poorer because of this. Well, we can think about that mother, father, love of God as a present reality, and my friend there certainly experienced that after the passing of his wife and the comfort of that. It gives us, these teachings give us a boundary-shattering perspective about life and about existence, about what's true, what's enduring, what's good in our lives. And it collapses the distance between us and our Creator. It helps us to see that every one of us has a oneness, a spiritual oneness with our God, with our Father, Mother, God. And as it says in the Bible, that we are made in the very likeness of our Creator. And all that God is, all that God knows, all that God does is good. And so each and every one of us is the very expression of that good, of that love, made in the likeness of our God. It's radical. It's absolutely revolutionary. You heard in the introduction, I'll just share this very quickly, that for me, I had a clinical practice as a psychotherapist for quite a number of years. I had a private practice. I had a specialty in addiction. I was a licensed marriage and family therapist. And what happened for me was this quest for an experience of something more than what we see around us propelled me to a search. And in doing that is when I was introduced to these teachings. And it was through the book, Mary Baker Eddy's groundbreaking book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. And that book has been in continuous publication. This year celebrates its 150 years that it's been in continuous publication. And the last 100 pages are letters written to the author of people that were healed and transformed just by reading the book, because the ideas help them to gain this new framing story about themselves and about life, seeing things through a spiritual lens. And for me, as I started to see that and experience that more and more, it was just very natural for me to want to help others to do that as well. And I have many friends that are in the mental health field, and I'm so grateful and so appreciate all the good they're doing. But my path took me down a different road, and so after a number of years of growth, of study, of some very high moments, some really challenging times, I decided to take down the shingle with one set of initials and put it up with another and start my practice as a Christian Science practitioner so that I could help others see themselves more and more through that lens, that we are made in the very likeness of our Creator, that experiencing the divine presence is absolutely natural for us. It's not mysterious, it's not hard to understand, it's not far off, but we do have to use a perceptive faculty that we all have. It's called spiritual sense, and it's innate, it's natural. It's our perceptive faculty that we have for understanding and experiencing Deity, our Creator, more and more in our lives. And I think why folks want that is, and maybe some of you, these are very challenging times today. Folks are looking for a greater peace of mind, a greater sense of stability, of meaning, of purpose, of value, that a more reliable health, greater harmony in relationships, a bigger sense of unity among families, communities, our nation, our world. And so experiencing the divine presence helps us to achieve that, utilizing our spiritual sense, like our intuition. That's part of our spiritual sense, our faith. Now, sometimes it can seem a bit, I know for folks, it can seem a bit hard to grasp or to recognize. Let me give you just a couple of examples. One, I was speaking recently in Florida, and when it was over, one woman came running up to me and she said, "I have to tell you what happened to me." She said that I was having a very, very difficult time, a tough day, and it must have been written all over my face because I went into the grocery store, and as I was paying for my groceries, the woman at the register checking me out leaned over and whispered in my ear, "God loves you." Isn't that wonderful? And she said, with that, she said, it's like the floodgates of tears just started to flow, and she felt this touch of love. You could say a Christly touch. It was this moment of awe that she felt so loved and cared for and comforted. She said all the stuff that had been going on that she was so distressed about just kind of vanished. That whole mood just completely changed. She had a mental shift in terms of how she was seeing, experiencing the presence of God. And now one more example. Recently, I live down in Fairfield County. I'm in Fairfield. And so I fly in and out of the New York airports. And so last month, unbeknownst to me when we planned this, the Saturday that I was flying to Orlando, what do we know is in Orlando, everyone, right? Yep, we've got Disney World. It was right at school vacation week. So I am at the airport, LaGuardia. I have never been on a plane with so many children in my life. The whole gate area is exploding. And it looked like this outside, except it was February. And guess what? It was beginning to snow. And these kids, we didn't know if we were going to get out. And everybody wanted to get to Orlando. So we're coming down the jetway, loading onto the plane. And there are car seats and there are strollers. I mean, there's just so much stuff with traveling with all these children. And the man that worked for the airline that was loading that baggage onto the plane was at the end of the jetway. He was a huge guy, super tall, and he was singing. He was singing to everybody coming down the jetway, and it was the Temptations song, My Girl. And I'm not going to sing for you. Trust me, you don't want to hear me sing. But he was saying, the words, because here it is, it's getting ready to snow. He said, I've got sunshine on a cloudy day, when it's cold outside, I've got the month of May. He's singing his heart out. And as you walked past him, he figured everybody knew the song. He'd lean into you so you could sing the next line back to him. It lifted everyone's mood, settled folks down. It was such an experience of joy. That was an experience of the divine presence. The question is, what lens are you looking out at the world? How are you seeing yourself? How are you seeing others? How are you seeing the things around you? That was just when we're recognizing the presence and action and activity of qualities, of spiritual qualities. In that case, it was joy. In the other situation, it was a sense of love and spiritual discernment of a need. But when we make an intelligent decision, that's all an experience of the divine presence. So I'm going to suggest to take a quick moment, just think within your own heart of the last day or two. And how about identifying an experience or experiences where your spiritual sense is informing what you are seeing, an experience of the divine presence, to recognize that. Because it's our relationship with our divine source that is the pathway to our spiritually ordained well-being. So are you thinking? Yes, taking a moment? Just the last day or two. It's really a question of the lens, that being awake, what we are recognizing, and that's happening for us and for those around us. And we want to be sure that we are utilizing our spiritual sense. And we can cultivate that. We can cultivate that. And a very simple but important and effective way to cultivate it is to recognize and acknowledge and give your wholehearted consent that you have spiritual sense, that it is innate. It is a God-given ability and capacity that you have, is your spiritual sense. So that's a very helpful way to just begin cultivating that perceptive faculty. I mentioned earlier that Christian Science gives us a new framing story, a way of understanding life, understanding, you could say, reality of what's true and what's enduring and permanent in our lives. And sometimes folks wonder about the idea that this is a science. Well, Mary Baker Eddy demanded provable results from this, and she understood that that Christian Science was a discovery, and it was a revelation that came to her. This is not something sometimes people ask, is this something she made up? She says she was a scribe under orders when she was writing Science and Health, that this was a revelation from God. And this is, when she spoke about it being a science, she, in her day, and the definition of science that she was subscribing to was a genuine knowledge and pure truth. And what she wrote in one of her other works about this, she says, this is what gives us this new framing story or paradigm for understanding existence. She said, if, as the scriptures declare, that's the body of literature that she's referring to, if we accept that body of literature, God made all that was made, that's what it says in the scriptures, then whatever is entitled to a classification as truth or science must be comprised in a knowledge or understanding of God, for there can be nothing beyond illimitable divinity. So what she does in that, she is collapsing the distance between science and theology. She is saying everything that is truthful, scientific, everything that is genuine knowledge rests in a knowledge or understanding of God. And so that gives us the new framing story. She said she discovered life in spirit and of spirit. As the Bible tells us, spirit is God. Life in spirit and of spirit, being the sole reality of existence, the only reality of existence. Now, for me, very early on when I started studying these teachings, this point was driven home. I was taking medication for a glandular issue. I was under the care of a physician, and that was the way that's the system of healthcare I used, was Western medicine. It's what I trusted. Now, Christian Science, these teachings transcend denomination. They transcend geographical borders. They can be utilized by anyone, anywhere, anytime for spiritual growth and spiritual healing. It is a discrete healing system without the use of surgery or drugs that's safe, that's reliable, that's effective. And though anyone, of course, is always free to care for themselves in whatever way they seem best. For me, when I started studying these teachings, I was under this doctor's care for this medication, and I thought, if this is all really true, that what I'm studying, that everything that God made is good, that life in spirit and of spirit, if that's really true, do I need to be tied to this medication? Because the doctor said I'd have to take it for the rest of my life. And so what I did was I stopped taking the medicine. I thought, well, I'll stop taking this medicine. And I continued my study of Christian Science, and it was opening up the Bible in fresh new ways for me. But what happened was that the difficulty that I was being treated for by a doctor returned. And so I had to make a decision. Certainly it's not wise to ignore an issue. And so I decided that rather than to go back on the medication, I would call a professional Christian Science practitioner to help me prayerfully to address this problem. And so as she and I were praying together. Now, it was distant prayer. She was in a different town from me. And of course, we know Jesus. Jesus' healing ministry, his practice, he wasn't always present with someone physically. And so she and I started praying together. And what I shared with her at the outset was that I wasn't the only one in my family with this health issue, that my mother had it, that my women cousins had it, that my aunts had it as well, that it seemed to be something that you could put into the category of, heredity or genetics. And so she knew that. And so, as I said, we were praying, and I went to one of Mary Baker Eddy's other writings. And it was in her book. She was a prolific author. She authored 16 books, countless sermons, letters, poems, and so much more. And in Unity of Good, I opened to this page, and this is what I read. God is life. And she capitalized that, life, as a name for God. And as there is but one God, there can be but one life. The page lit up. One God, one life. And I reasoned, if there's only one life, it can't be material. It has to be spiritual. It's just impossible any other way. Life in and of spirit is what she said. So in that moment, what happened was I got this view, this new view of myself, that I was not, and this is what Christian Science teaches, I was not this bundle of material elements or this blend of material and spiritual elements that needed to be fixed, but rather I was a beautiful tapestry of spiritual qualities, faculties, and abilities derived right from my Creator. Qualities, spiritual qualities that we've talked about, like creativity, of love, of goodness, of holiness, of health, of harmony, and faculties and abilities like spiritual discernment, spiritual understanding that came to me. Remember I said earlier, collapses the distance between us and our Creator. And I saw all that I am, all that I be, all that I inherit comes from my Father, Mother, God, infinite, inexhaustible, unvarying, unchanging love, spirit, good. So that completely annihilated this suggestion that I had inherited something from my mother that could harm me. That sense of heredity was only good from my God. And now, this was a radical idea. I mean, this went against everything I had been taught. But it was so clear to me that in that moment, I recognized just a sense of being wholly spiritual, right here and right now. And along with that recognition, I also saw that and had this feeling, if there's only one life, then we are all brothers and sisters. We all have the same one divine parent, God. And I felt this unity, this brotherhood, this sisterhood with everyone. It broke down the barriers of divisions, and I felt this oneness. So it was this sense of being wholly spiritual, a unity with everyone because we had the same source. And with that light, you could say, that enlightenment, because you see, Christian Science practice, Christian Science healing is not about making a sick body well or fixing something material. It is about awakening to who and what we really are and what God is and what God knows and is doing. It's an awakening to who we really are as the children of God. And that's indeed what happened. And as that happened for me, and our God is communicating to us all the time. You can think of deity as a divine consciousness, an all good spiritual consciousness, the source of all right thinking, right motives, right actions, communicating, imparting ideas to us all the time. And that's what I felt was happening in that moment, was that I was getting a clearer sense and clearer understanding as to who I was and who everyone else was. And with that, the situation with the glandular issue just went completely back to, it had been inflamed, it went completely back to normal, and I was well and have been well for many years since. Life in and of spirit, sole reality of existence. Now, this quest to experience God, at times, and I think actually very often, it's impelled when we have maybe a very challenging time. Some will call it, and the Bible has a term called the wilderness, or experiences of the wilderness. Does that sound familiar, a wilderness experience? Certainly we know Jesus, right? Jesus went into the wilderness, in the Bible tells us, before his ministry. The children of Israel wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Well, the wilderness experiences can often be what propels a quest, a mission, a journey for something more than what we see around us or what we are experiencing. And now, in Science and Health, Mary Baker Eddy has one of the chapters is a glossary where she defines biblical terms. And wilderness is one of them that she defines. And she starts out with this: loneliness, doubt, darkness. Now, she doesn't leave us there. This is a woman who experienced, she wrote this book. I think of Science and Health as an autobiography. She had to prove everything she wrote about. And in this book, she helps us to understand how to practice and follow Jesus' example of healing, of living, of loving. And so wilderness, loneliness, doubt, darkness. But then she goes on and she says, the vestibule in which a material sense of things disappears and spiritual sense unfolds the great facts of existence. A vestibule, she's telling us, where what's happening, that material sense of things disappears. And what happens? Spiritual sense, that perceptive faculty, is unfolding to us, unfolding from within, an understanding of the great facts of existence. So she's telling us that vestibule is a time of transformation. It's a time where we are moving from seeing things from a material view, a material sense, to an increasingly spiritual one. A friend of mine shared this definition of vestibule he found with me, which I just love. It is, this is a definition, a dictionary definition. It's a porch or an entrance into a house or a large open space before the door. You know, it's between two places, but covered. Covered. I love that little addition there, but covered. So when we are in that vestibule, that transformation time, we are safe, we are protected, we are sheltered, we are protected as we are advancing, as we are learning, as we are growing, as maybe we are struggling. Now, it's interesting if you think about, I love thinking about the little caterpillar. And you know, the caterpillar, when it's transforming into a butterfly, do you know it completely changes its substance? It becomes liquid. This caterpillar becomes totally liquid, and it weaves a chrysalis, a protective covering where the transformation takes place safely. And do you know that that little caterpillar in that chrysalis, nothing comes in from the outside for that transformation to happen. Everything that caterpillar needs is already within. It reminds me of when Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is within you. It is at hand. It is a present reality. We have to awaken to it. We have to call forth these spiritual qualities. It's already the truth about who we are. Like today, we don't see a lot of sunshine. The clouds, the fog tries to hide the sun. That's all it is, but the sun is shining. The truth about who we are is already there. That little caterpillar is transforming in a chrysalis. And Mary Baker Eddy uses that term chrysalis as regard to faith. She says, in the chrysalis of faith, that is sometimes what we need to do, is to walk in our faith, safely, protected, sheltered, to untangle the lies about who we are, what we are, from the truth about who and what we are, grow in our trust of God, advance in our understanding. And so I love that idea of thinking that when we're in these wilderness moments, perhaps in this quest, we are in a chrysalis, that it's a safe place. In fact, I was so struck, because I had planned to talk to you about this chrysalis. As I was driving through Hartford to get here, I got off the highway and I stopped at a light. I looked to my left and there was an awning that said chrysalis. There is an institution here in Hartford that is a chrysalis institution. And I thought, how perfect is that? A place of hope, a place of transformation, a place of love and support. And so if you are in one of those wilderness moments, or you know someone that is, understand it is a vestibule. You are safe, you are protected, that just like that little caterpillar, you have everything you need already within. And in fact, are you familiar with Robert Louis Stevenson? Have you heard of him? Yes, I see some yeses, the Scottish author. When he was a little boy in Scotland, the street lamps had to be lit by hand. And so at night, the lamplighters would climb up, take the glass off, light it, and go back down. And apparently little Robert was just fascinated by this. And he would be staring out the window at night watching these lamplighters. And his parents said to him, "Robert, what are you looking at?" And he said, "Look at that man. He's punching holes in the darkness." He's punching, you see, that's what these ideas do, punching holes in the darkness. The claim of the clouds hiding the sun, the claim of darkness, the claim of inability to see clearly, to feel things rightly. Punching holes in the darkness. And what Mary Baker Eddy has a great way of explaining that in Science and Health. She says this, that the great spiritual facts of being, like rays of light, shine in the darkness. Now, Jesus understood that so fully, that no matter what was put before him, no matter whether it was a storm, whether it was blindness, whether it was a contagious disease, no matter what it was, death even, Jesus knew it did not have any divine authority. If it was not good, it was not from God, and on that basis, it could be challenged and it could be overcome. And that's indeed what he did. And his example shows us what's possible. And Mary Baker Eddy, through her writings and through her life example, helps us to live that, to practice that for ourselves. And in fact, this book has, for 150 years, been touching, transforming, healing, uplifting, enlightening lives. And in fact, a friend of mine shared with me that when he was a younger man, he was addicted to opium. And it was pretty severe addiction. And he was pretty desperate when he went to a family wedding. And at the wedding, he talked with his cousin who was studying these teachings. And she said to him, go home, get a Science and Health, and just read it. So that's what he did. He went home, he got a Science and Health, and he started reading the book. And he said, within the first few pages, remember the quest to experience God, within the first few pages of reading Science and Health, he thought, if God exists, this is how God exists. It was giving him a new view, a new understanding of God. That reward-punishment paradigm that the folks are revolting against and seeking after a new view, for him, that's what happened. He got a new view. One of the ways Mary Baker Eddy, there's so many ways that she helps to expand that infinite subject of understanding God. And she helps us to see God as a divine principle, capital P. And he said for him, seeing God as a divine principle. And what is that principle? A foundation, source, origin, cause, that divine infinite principle love was the foundation, spirit was the foundation of all existence. And he said, with that view that shifted, remember, it's not the words that heal, it's the ideas and what happens to us as we come to see things differently, the transformation in our thought. And so he said within the first week, he was completely cured of that opium addiction just by reading the book. No withdrawal symptoms. And then he said that he kept on reading. He made a decision at that point to stop drinking alcohol. And he kept reading Science and Health. And he said within a couple of weeks, he was completely healed of cigarette smoking as well, just by reading the book. Gaining this idea of God as infinite principle, the one source, life in and of spirit, the soul, the only reality of existence. And Mary Baker Eddy's life, I've just been able to give you just a little sprinkling about her. Her life and accomplishments are huge. And as I said earlier, she brought forth an example, a bold and yet gentle example of the spiritual womanhood and motherhood of God. And she lived it so fully. She had an extensive healing record. She healed others of cancer, of paralysis, of blindness, of deafness, physical deformity, heart disease, and so much more. I would encourage you, if you want to experience God through and take a deeper dive into the Christian Science teachings, we need to do that. We need to have a good understanding of her life. Because as I said earlier, the book, Science and Health, that explains Christian Science, I really see it to be an autobiography. She lived and proved everything she wrote about. And so you need to get to know her life in order to continue to advance in your understanding and practice of Christian Science. So I'd encourage you to get to know her. There is a library physically, the physical location, which actually is not very far from here in Boston, but it's available online. MaryBakerEddyLibrary.org. It's a wealth of information, of resources to get to know her and her life accomplishments and her writings. I'd encourage you to take some time to do that. I know sometimes the pull away from God, the pull away from good can seem very powerful. It can seem just almost overwhelming. But the good news is the way these teachings are designed, it helps open our hearts to the influence of the divine nature. That divine nature is our identity. It is our Christliness. Jesus lived that so fully, he was given the title Christ Jesus. That divinity, that godlikeness, that is the truth about every one of us. Christ defines our identity. That Christly light, that Christly holy influence is always present and operative in consciousness. And for a friend of mine who was really struggling with hatred of a family member, and it was a self-righteous hatred because she said the family member hated her first. So she, yeah, sound familiar to anyone? She felt quite self-justified and self-righteous in that, but she said that the more she thought about it, it was just, it consumed her for years. She said she just didn't want to stay there anymore. That Christly, punching holes in the darkness, that Christly light was just making itself felt in her heart. And in praying one day, she asked herself, do I really want to be, held in bondage to the depths of this hatred? Or do I want to, and do I want to surrender who I really am, my healthy, joyful, loving, true self, Christly self, made in the image and likeness of good, of God? Do I want to do that? And she said she absolutely said no, she did not. And with that, she said the years of hatred were just completely expunged. Absolutely. Something she'd been carrying around for years. And she said, she didn't know if she'd ever hear from this family member, but she felt so free, punching holes in the darkness. It doesn't have the kind of hold over any of us that it would claim to. The light of Christ, God's infinite, inexhaustible love, is the one and only presence and power. And that's what she recognized. And she said she felt completely free, not knowing if she'd ever hear from that family member. And guess what happened? She got a text from the family member like there was just nothing wrong, and they've gone on to have a lovely relationship. That love can absolutely nullify anything unlike itself. Good can destroy anything unlike itself. It doesn't have any power. God, good, life in and of good is the sole reality of existence, the divine principle of life. And so what I hope that these stories that I've shared with you, these examples, and as you've been thinking about just your own life, I asked at the very beginning if you had heard of the God-shaped hole, H-O-L-E, that in reality, there is no God-shaped hole. We are whole, W-H-O-L-E. And so I'd like to just finish with something that was published in the Christian Science Sentinel. Mary Baker Eddy, in addition to her many other accomplishments, established a publishing society. And one of the publications is the Christian Science Sentinel. And in there, this was actually published in 1906, was a statement by Reverend Phillips Brooks. He was a Boston Episcopal priest, and maybe you know him as the author of the Christmas Carol, O Little Town of Bethlehem. And so Reverend Brooks wrote this, and it was published in the Sentinel. And in Mary Baker Eddy's copy of that, she put a little note underneath it. And so I'm going to finish with Reverend Brooks' words and then Mary Baker Eddy's words. So again, a big thank you to the folks here at the Christian Science Church for bringing us together, giving us this opportunity to think about this revolution, this spiritual revolution, the quest to experience God and how we might do that. And as Eddy writes in her book, Christian Science meets a yearning of the human race for spirituality. She was bold. She knew what she had discovered. She knew what God had revealed to her. So first, Reverend Brooks. God has not given us vast learning to solve all the problems or unfailing wisdom to direct all the wanderings of our brothers' lives, but he has given to every one of us the power to be spiritual, and by our spirituality, to lift and enlarge and enlighten the lives we touch. And underneath that, she wrote this: the secret of my life is in the above. And friends, the same is true for ours. Thank you all. This has been wonderful to be with you. And to our friends online, thank you for being with us.